Rykard's Rancor is one of the highest damage spells in Elden Ring, but also one of the most unpredictable. It shoots out a trail of spirits that repeatedly explode after a short delay, which can quickly add up to tens of thousands of damage under the right circumstances. That's why I always wanted to create a build around it and make it my mission to annihilate every single major boss and then some in Elden Ring with it, so that's what we're basically going to do in this video. Now this build uses high levels of intelligence with quite a bit of faith, since Rykard's Rancor itself requires points into both of these stats as it is, so the rest of the build just followed up naturally. This in turn will give you access to a wide range of sorceries and incantations, but for the purpose of this video we'll mainly focus on the Rancor. Now this is an excellent high damage spell that has the potential to one-shot bosses. The larger they are, the better the results being, obviously. It does take a bit of time to get used to with the slight delay and the travel patterns, but if you get used to with the fights and especially with proper positioning, you can more than pull this off. Obviously the damage is not going to be as direct as something like the Comet Azure for example, but there is a major advantage on top of that, which is the fact that the Ghost Trail actually does follow its target and can readjust in the middle of the cast, which is something that Comet Azure really can pull off, and you're kind of stuck in a very strict kind of cast with it. This means that as long as the target doesn't move too far away, or if you can make it stay in place, you can hit the same target multiple times with all of these explosions, which results in some of the best damage Elden Ring spells have to offer. Another thing about this build is that we don't just get to rely on the Rancor damage, but also have a lot of items and additional skills to improve upon that even more. So let's talk about some of the main items. The main casting staff is obviously going to be the Lusat, giving you the highest sorcery scaling with this build, but it does increase your FP cost by about 50%. Now during boss nukes, when you use the Physic Potion, that's not going to be an issue since you will have infinite mana for about 10 to 15 seconds, but outside of that we'll make use of Carrion Regal Scepter, which doesn't have any of those downsides, while still providing a nice replacer and a good incantation scaling with the same 80 intelligence that we have with this build. In your offhand, you will also want to make use of the Gelmer staff, now not for casting but for the 15% additional damage increase that you get from it for lava sorceries, which by the way Rykard's Rancor for some reason totally is, so that's a nice free damage on top. In terms of armor, I just went with a navy hood because I really like it. It also gives you 1 point extra into mind, but it mostly fits fashion-wise with the unaltered version of the Beast Champion armor, especially with the cape, and I think it fits a priest/mage kind of build really nicely. And you also get some nice defenses and poise on top, so totally worth it. Now in terms of talismans, there's a few options and also a bunch of tests that I've performed. Since Rykard's Rancor is a lava spell, this means it also gets affected by anything that buffs up fire damage. Fire Scorpion Charm totally works in providing that 12% additional damage increase, and as a matter of fact, strangely enough, it seems to provide a bigger damage boost in terms of rough numbers compared to the Magic Scorpion Charm, which should affected by the same 12% increase. I'm not really sure what's happening here. Probably some of that faith is kind of messing up with the scaling, but in my test, Fire Scorpion Charm was definitely the better option. You still have the option to totally get both of them at the same time, by the way. In this case I was using a Graven Mass Talisman, but that one only provides an 8% increase to sorcery damage, while the Scorpion variant will provide 12%, so that's probably the best option you can run with. Finally, let's also talk about the crystal tiers and a couple of other tests that I've done as well. Both Flame and the Magic Cracked tiers will buff up the damage on Rykard's Rancor, but between these two, again, the Flame variant provided the much higher damage increase than the Magic one. And since we also can't use both of them at the same time because we do need that infinite mana, the obvious choice was going with that Flame Cracked tier for the maximum damage possible. Now, in terms of combat strategy, here is how it goes, especially against bosses. As I've said, not only do we get access to a ton of items that buff our damage to crazy levels, but also to incantations. Mainly, we're gonna make use of the Flame Grant Me Strength, which is going to provide a nice 20% damage increase, you guessed it, to fire spells, so totally the Rykard Rancor. If you're up against a boss, you likely want to start with that, and also follow up maybe with a Physic Potion, which will truly buff your damage to the max and provide you that infinite mana that you need for about 15 seconds. If you do that properly, and if you have the right positioning, or at the very least if you can distract the boss in some way, you can unleash at least a few of these casts, which will quickly overwhelm the enemy, deal a ton of damage, and oftentimes even interrupt or maybe even fully stun them. Even something like Radagon or the Elden Beast won't be a match for you once you do this, and in this case I totally prefer using the Physic Potion just before the cutscene that leads into the fight with the Elden Beast, so that once that's done I can immediately start the fight and spam about 3 or 4, maybe even 5 devastating casts with the Rancor that will totally destroy the beast. So yeah, totally an option to clear out the entire game right there. Now, as I've said, this will require you to position yourself properly and take advantage of the times the bosses stay in place or charge up their heavy attacks. This would be the perfect time to unleash at least 1 or 2 of these casts and make sure that the resulting attack will be hitting the boss with the majority of the explosions to get maximum damage. If they move too much, you can always try to pull them into a corner or a harder to move area where you will get plenty of space to dodge around, but they won't, and you can also make sure that the Rancor explosions will cover enough space so that they constantly get hit. That's, or maybe use a summon to distract them. I found that to be a perfect alternative. You're free to cast a ton of these, but totally make sure you don't just like backpedal too much, because that will get them out of the range. You will want to actually kind of circle around them, flank them a little bit, and unleash the Rancor that way. In terms of downsides, yes, there are a few, and one of them is, well, anything that's too small in terms of hitbox, or if it moves too much, or if you just can't play around with the Rancor, is obviously going to make this build really not optimal. So you might want to switch for something else, but as I've said, since this has pretty good scaling with both Faith and Intelligence, you will get a wide range of selections between both incantations and sorceries. Besides, you're not going to always hit with the entire spell anyway, unless you're fighting something like the Elden Beast. Even in that case, you're going to miss quite a few of the damage explosions, but even so, you're still going to stack up a ton of damage very quickly and oftentimes interrupt and fully stun them. Now, on a final note, we haven't discussed the stats, but I think it's pretty obvious what you're going with right here. Of course, that Intelligence, 80 points into it, is a must if you want to buff up your spell damage as much as possible, and of course also get as much scaling from Lusat's staff as well. In the case of Faith, since I was using this on a Confessor class, I did not need to invest any additional points into it since I was making use of Marika's Source Seal. I know a lot of people don't like this past the 125, but I liked using both of them, which meant that I could just go 5 levels below about 5 of the stats that I really needed with this build to work properly, so that I could focus on something else instead and still have enough levels to not like completely overshoot 130. Otherwise, if you don't have a problem with that, then you can just switch around and maybe get some extra magic damage, maybe add a Graven Mass Talisman on top of the ones that we had instead of one of these Source Seals, or maybe even get some FP cost reduction in case you find yourself consuming too much mana. This is it though with the build. Totally let me know down below, is there any other different way you're using the Rykard Rancor? Have you even tried it so far, and if so, do you enjoy it? Thanks so much for watching. As always, if you enjoyed this video at any point, a thumbs up on it would be greatly appreciated, and if you really enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe and activate that notification bell, and I'll see you guys in the next one.